Hey everyone, this is Andrew. Thanks for tuning back in for another episode. We are now at 11 episodes, I think is what it is. The journey has been an absolute delight, a lot of fun. Not easy, not gonna lie to you. Like the whole process of like taking time out of the working day to create space for a conversation that prompts new thoughts is always a bit tricky, right? I think we all struggle with this, that we get into a little bit of a routine of where we're navigating, just the basic issues of the day, and spending time thinking about something else that sits outside of that is a tall ask. And so I know that listening to these episodes is also part of that process for you, that going through the journey of stepping outside of your day-to-day role is not an easy task for any person. So thank you for going with me on this journey so far. Today's episode is with Amir Rizwan, an amazing social investor, thinker, worker in the community of London and social finance, figuring out how do we find ways to stimulate a different version of society that will be more equitable for others. And his experience as a migrant to the UK, learning about his journey through the process of getting to where he is today is and was a lot of fun. This episode we recorded a few months back, so there is a little bit of maybe slightly dated AI commentary, but I think the process of how we think is still applicable to the challenges that we're facing today. We actually started the conversation organically, and we were just sitting there, and then I realized that he was going straight into the content, and so I had to hit record. And so where we started off is just a question of, where and how are you using AI in your life? Because Amir had just told me that his journey through it was a process of kind of reflective activity, right? Thinking about how he could put the information that he has in his mind into the AI system, whatever GPT you're using, and then from there, he was able to kind of reflect and share his thoughts on that. So I will turn it over to Amir to share his thoughts and, of course, the rest of the podcast. So thank you so much for listening. I look forward to the whole experience with you in this process.
GPT as a tool for dumping all of your thoughts from a random stream of topic, and you just lay it out there like a buffet, and ChatGPT organizes it for you in order to make sure that you are saying something rational, or are you trying to get it to back up your data and like find sources and this kind of thing?
So I guess firstly, the reason I am doing that is I've got ADHD, and one of the things that I love and I hate about my brain is that it's always continually switched on. So tools like this actually are like a lifesaver in a way of just bringing that all together in an orderly fashion. What I'm getting it to do is to just create some order and structure around what is an expansive array of things I just in my mind at one point around a topic or thoughts that come up. What I'm not doing is getting it to validate it for me, because I don't want it to say, this is the right thing.
You're a good boy.
Trying to use it in an ethical way. However,
wait, talk about that. Why do you mean it's ethical? Like what is
ethical is not the right
validating?
word, but I think there's a sense of like, we should be okay owning our own opinions and thoughts about something and not necessarily having it to always be validated. And frankly, it's okay to actually get it wrong sometimes, depending on what wrong is, because wrong is different to the eyes of different people. What I worry about over-reliance on AI tools by some people, and I guess some of the current trends, is creating this kind of amazing polished version of your thoughts or whatever it is all the time, consistently. And I think this is where I worry about for maybe the younger generations who, especially if you're maybe early on in your career or starting up, where I remember like when I started off, like the amount of times I was getting stuff wrong, writing stuff that was wrong, and just seeing like red lines or track changes everywhere, just realizing, damn, I need to learn from this. In the sense of like that. Imagine if you didn't have to do that and like that didn't happen, and all you just created is like the perfect version all the time.
Have you ever heard the phrase, I've got this turd of an idea?
And if you polish it enough, it could be a diamond.
Right? And so like, this is the thing, is if you start with ChatGPT and you assume that that's the baseline, you never get to discover the complexities of said fecal matter, right? Because the reality is like most things start off in the most wonky,
Yeah.
unshapely, unpleasant thing, and then you become a diamond.
Yeah. But the thing is when you're going through that process, that's where you learn the most.
Mm.
But also, I think there's an inherent, I think there's, for me, there's, again, linking to some, like something that I believe in is just this trend or belief that it's bad to get things wrong. It's embarrassing. It's like
Yeah.
this sense of like, it's got to be perfect straight away.
Mm.
I think it's beginning to be baked into how we're trying to function as a society.
It's probably because of the social media culture, right?
Social media culture, I think fear of failure, there's lots of things that roll into that. And yeah, there's different people, but the sense of like, it's got to be perfect straight away. I have to be perfect all the time. I can't show any sense of deficiencies or any sense that I'm like not great in some areas.
Hmm. Well, let's transition from there because we've gone straight into a topic and we just hit the record button, and we didn't actually talk about the perfection that is Amir Rizwan. Tell me, like, give this the intro, bro. I mean, like, thank you one for being here and listening and having a conversation with me about I think quite a lot of things we're going to go on a journey today. Let's just start with, tell us a little bit about you. What's your origin story? Like, why are you here? What do you do now? What are you thinking about? What's stressing you the hell out about, hey, work, life, society?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for having me at your wonderful home, and
Pleasure.
had a good chance to look at your bookshelf and
And judge me.
didn't spot any problematic books, which would have led me to like maybe just walk away or just climb out of your balcony. So I guess the origin story, I'm not very good at like telling this because I think as you get older, it just gets more long-winded and complex. But I think certainly the things that I always come back to resonate, especially around that question, is, I'm someone who came to the country as a refugee at the age of 5, have, I guess, what you call lived experience and an understanding firsthand of being excluded from systems, whether it's housing, whether it's marginalization, growing up in an area where it wasn't, a nice area to grow up. But at the same time, had a really lovely solid base of community, family, and various, I guess, structures that aren't necessarily in place now that have led me to kind of like have the opportunity to be where I am in that sense. Like, I think fondly of like the youth clubs I was at when I was young and thinking actually, if I didn't have those youth clubs there, life would have been very different because where else would we have gone to blow off steam as young boys and young kids at that stage? And it's a shame now we're in a stage where we've decimated entire structures at the local level doing that, because I can firsthand see where that would have caused issues for me.
Right.
Had they not been there. But that said, all the various things are there. So I've always had this kind of sense of like my story is a bit of a mixed one that's not been easy, but one that's also been quite lovely as well in terms of the stuff I've had to got to enjoy and also kind of like be part of. Managed to get to university, first in my household to go to university, went to SOAS as well. For people who don't know what SOAS is, it's a really special institution here in London where it centers around the teaching of various kind of like topics, but from a lens of the global south and various things, which I think really appealed to me at the time. But it was also my first chance to move away from like a state school education in East London, where my community was very limited, to then go into university where I met people from all over the world for the first time, and my kind of mind blew in that sense. So I really enjoyed the education at SOAS, but then there was that struggle to be like, what do I do with this and how do I get a job? And not knowing what that was in that sense. And I think the UK education system is absolutely bonkers in how it forces young people to decide so early on about careers and all these various things when they've got no idea what that is. And especially for people who don't have family members or networks who've entered fields or professions, it's extremely hard to get those valuable internships or graduate jobs.
Yeah.
And I basically at that time just transitioned to a world where I worked in financial service industries for like 4 or 5 years. And it was both enjoyable and I was learning a lot, but there was just something that was just like, I don't know if this is for me. This like unsettling feeling and like, what is this? And it was during the financial crash as well. So, starting to see all the literature and thoughts about actually like, what is the system that we're all beholden to and we value and look at, but no one really understands. And so I think that certainly planted seeds in my head of like, what is this I'm doing? But still not sure about what that was. And then I went to a talk with Mohammed Yunus, who was coming to London. He was speaking about Green Bank and this whole idea of like
Social enterprise.
social enterprise, in the sense of like, that sense of like, what is this world he's talking about? Like you can like use finance for good and all these various things. And at the time in the UK as well, there was this growing narrative about the social investment market and the growth of that. So it was like the perfect storm. And then that's where I transitioned to working within, I guess, what you call social investment or social innovation, where I've been in the sector for the last 12, 13 years. I think I've had 5 or 6 different roles in that sense. I've been a bit of a journeyman, but I think it's also partly because of there's been so many things popping up and changing and opportunities that come up that enable you to do that. And it's a sector which I guess we'll come into in terms of the kind of value it has and the opportunities, but also some of the fundamental challenges and issues that I see as being quite problematic in different ways. However, I've enjoyed definitely being in the space and kind of creating a community around it as well. And I think there's a lot of really great work happening in the kind of nether regions of the sector that should be getting more prominence and pick up. And I think that's where I've been, I guess, for now. And I guess my role in a simple way has always been around how do we support more social innovation? There's such great ideas out there, but what's lacking is the access to support opportunities and networks. And it's almost a money as well. And also it's can be a closed club. Like certain ideas can come through, but certain ideas get pushed to the regions as being, oh no, we don't want that. We want this kind of opportunity. So I feel like my role is, as I want it to be, is how do you create those connective tissues that bring together these disparate systems? Because sometimes we're very good at creating pots of money, but what we don't think about is what needs to sit around this money, like this infrastructure, this kind of connective tissue, because no one wants to fund that. Everyone wants to fund.
No, God, no.
Everyone wants to fund their impact. Everyone wants to fund the shiny case study. Everyone wants to be like, that's my impact, David. It's not your impact. You're a funder. It's their impact. Stop stealing the narrative. I get really annoyed when I see impact reports from certain funders and investors talking about their impact. I'm like, no, you're just a middleman between the money and the ideas. Do your job.
There's nothing wrong with being a middleman, right? And I think that's essential, right?
Exactly. And we need more middlemen, but it's just almost like the narrative is important about who owns what this is. And there are great ideas everywhere, like on every kind of like in neighborhoods and community centers, in areas that are away from the established kind of centers that we tend to go to.
Yeah.
But they are just so deprived of resources, access to systems, markets, money, support, that, they're kind of almost on being supported by the kind of like passion,
the will of
and the will and the hard work and the sweat of individuals.
Yeah.
Right. And that can only go so far. So I guess that's who I am as a
just in a few minutes. That's me.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a bit of a long intro.
No, you're fine. Because like 5 years ago, when I first saw your profile on LinkedIn, I think it was about 5 years ago, by the way, you were heavier back then. Well done on being healthy and living your best life.
The camera adds 5 pounds.
So I've got 3 cameras on you right now, so you're about 15 pounds more. So the whole process of like getting to know you over the 5 years, one has been really great, because I admit when I first saw you, I don't think I understood, and I think this happens a lot of social media. You don't know what the person's about, right? You have no clue what they do, what it is that they care about. This whole layer about like the connective tissue, that's something I've really gotten passionate about as well over the 5 years, because I've just discovered how little people value the in-between, and how little they value the infrastructure, the ecosystem behind building anything, right? And like, if we just take it back to simple language, when we think about like a community center, or if we think about like a charity or social enterprise who's trying to do something good, or maybe just, 10 people in a neighborhood wanting to organize a solution for someone whose house is just burned down, how do they help each other out? There is a distinct lack in today's society of people being able to figure out how to work together, right? And that is manifesting in so many different places, because people don't want to invest in that. Think about like social media right now. Like we have no impetus to like build a new relationship with someone else and then say, let's get together and meet them. They have to be, as you were saying earlier, perfect, right? They have to be perfect for me. Like, think about dating, right? It's like, oh, I got to find the perfect person, and there's no acceptance of the flaws, right? And that's stressful, right? Because there's so much joy
Yeah.
and, BS in the imperfections. So now that you've been in this space for 15 years, what issues are you most passionate about right now, and what things are you most frustrated about right now?
Yeah, I think the passion is certainly around, we're in an era where, you know, we're in this sense of like polycrisis, multi, whatever you want to call it, where there's so much happening all at once, just like such upheavals, both here in the UK, globally, and inherently we need to kind of define what a new normal looks for us, one which isn't centered on extractive, like, modes of operating, or have legacies of linkages to things like colonialism and kind of like the dark past that we've gone through with
Yeah,
inherent power structure. So we need to completely remodel how we do things, how we operate, what we value as good.
a little
Or
revelation.
yeah, we need it because effectively, like, if we carry on as we are with the current system in place, I mean, we're already seeing the climate crisis in action, where
Mm-mm.
we're past the point of like reducing the temperatures to a safe level. Now where it's like, we just need to focus on just making things as less bad as they can be.
Okay.
That's terrifying,
Yeah.
because for me that signals, well, what will happen then is there'll be a group who'll like totally be fine because they have access to the means, resources,
Back to the
networks, all
money.
these things. They'll be able to put an air conditioning unit outside, whatever. They can do all that. And then there'll be completely kind of like large swathes of communities and areas and parts of the world where they'll be just decimated,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
Primarily because we live in that unequal system and we're seeing it right in our eyes. So, that is just a microcosm of one issue, and you can multiply that across many other
Mm.
areas there. But the dynamics are still the same. It's the system that kind of like enables that to happen. There's a way around this. There's a way of like bringing change, collective action. There's ideas. There's like people who are thirsty for change and want to do that. And if we can harness that and change that, it could be transformational.
Okay.
And it could also be basically a new area of growth for us in terms of like growth of what we call our economy or well-being, all these various things, right? It can actually be a net positive in that
Right.
sense.
Right.
What terrifies me is the sense that I don't think we're quite there yet around cottoning onto that, because
Mm.
we're still operating with the same structures in place, with
And the same assumption.
the same assumptions are.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a point that really speaks to like the question that has been hounding me ever since Brexit, which has been, all the people who voted for Brexit, right, are frustrated with a system that doesn't work for them, right? And this is the thing that I think a lot of people are missing out on. It's like you said, collective action earlier, right? Collective action just automatically gets associated with the left, right?
Yeah.
It's not a thing that everybody does, but if you think about it, what motivated and has propelled people like Donnie, propelled Marine Le Pen, propelled all the right-wing leaders across a lot of countries where they're trying to organize a revolt against the globalist system is collective action, right? And this is the thing that I think people just screw up so much, is that they say collective action is only one thing, but there are ways that the frustration is manifesting on both parties, right? That's why people are really angry with Labor right now, as well as really angry with the Tories.
And if you take that kind of what you're saying and you bring, I guess, the UK context, you look at like the surge in reform. So now Labour are terrified of reform.
Yeah.
They're completely turning all their firepower and ways of engagement around taking on reform. Look at reform and the way they talk about economics, and like they're almost taking a leftist style approach for economics. So you've got people in reform talking about nationalisation. You've got people in reform talking about the monopolies of corporates and all these various things. They're actually they're starting to cotton on actually.
Those are left-wing talking points.
And that's, I think, what there's an interesting base where like, people say like, oh, they're far right in this, so therefore they'll give you like, free market ideologues and all this. No, actually they're taking left leaning positions on the economy, and they're crafting this narrative of blending their kind of like repugnant views on and immigrants or refugees and all that stuff, and almost an ethno-nationalist position.
Yeah.
with leftist economists, leftist kind of economics at the same time. And then you have Labour, who seemingly stand for nothing, are adopting the weather vane style of politics. And in some senses, you're seeing that come out where they're trying to out reform. But the fact of the matter is, they're not sticking with that. Their message isn't sticking with that group. They're being seen as being like, oh, we don't believe you in that sense. And
Yeah.
until you radically change things, until there's a sense of like a new narrative within that kind of party, they run the risk of basically, yeah, well, I don't know what's going to be like the next election. We still have a lot of time left, but at the moment, things aren't looking good in every poll. And that sense of like, what is it that they truly stand for me, isn't there. And I think that resonates across a lot of our politics because this kind of stuff they pushed out, oh, it's mission, it's this, it's the vagueness of like, what is it you really stand for as an ideological group, as a party? People still don't know that. People say that about Labour as a sense that we don't know what they stand for. And that worries me a great deal that.
Same as Democrats, right? No one knows what they
Yeah.
stand for, right? Yeah. I mean, I understand the concern, right? Because ultimately, you know, the concern I think doesn't stem from us being worried about one particular party. Rather, it stems from the fact that there's no solution being put forward to address some of these issues, right? And I think you see a lot of people disengaging from the political system and disengaging from taking action simply because the storytelling is so rubbish, right? You're just like, dude, what are you doing? You think in a day where, you know, every person's walking around with a camera,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like trying to tell a story with it, that would be better about figuring out how to connect, or at least the institutions would figure out how to connect. But I can't, like, you know, we said this before, I can't think of a single influencer who is convening maybe more liberal thought in the same way that somebody like a Laura Loomer or like
Yeah.
even Joe Rogan, like, you know, he's pretty much in that camp.
Yeah.
And so you're just like, how come these storytellers on that end of the spectrum have done so well? And what do you think's wrong with the people like on this side of the fence?
I think it's interesting because we were talking earlier as well about this, where I was at an event last night and Gary Stevenson was there, who, if people don't know who he is, he's got his channel, Gary's Economics. He's doing a lot on wealth inequality, and you know, he's from his angle been pushing the notion like we need a wealth tax, we need to look at inequality, and ringing the alarm bells of if we don't do this or if we don't sort this out, we basically open the door to, you know, like the dark forces of Nigel Farage and others coming in. And yeah, I fundamentally agree on that as well, in the sense of how that's coming across. And he's an interesting person because he's now created like a really popular kind of like social media platform, lots of subscribers, he gets to use it, his message is resonating, but he's also like, you know, his origin story is a white working class guy. We actually grew up not far from each other in terms of where I grew up and he grew up. I know the area where he grew up, and he's, I mean, he's, you can just tell the way he speaks, and I kind of like, actually, it's very different from a lot of other progressives who, you know, come from, and it's no shame to say this because I'm not like saying it's a bad thing, but they come from the university educated route. You know, they might come from areas where, you know, there's more privilege, and they're trying to connect on some of these issues, but it's not, the message isn't resonating because it doesn't sound genuine. It doesn't seem genuine. It sounds like they're being, you know, when people hear it, it's like they're being talked at, not talked with. And I think we don't have those spaces where we can kind of have those conversations, where we can bring people in, where there's going to be disagreements, where there's going to be groups that are completely away from where we are, but we don't have a space or a commons where we can have an engagement that's truly actually like saying, actually, we probably have a lot in common because you and I agree on these principles.
Yeah.
In the sense of we want a more fairer economic system, a more progressive tax system. We want to end like monopolies and the role of kind of like private companies delivering public goods. We need more public owned infrastructure in that sense. We need better paying work. And we also need a social sector that, you know, delivers for people. And that's that will resonate across different
parties.
stripes, right?
Yeah.
So there's a sense that, you know, if we weren't in the economic malaise we're in now, people weren't worried about paying the rent or the bills, weren't in precarious employment in that sense, had access to, you know, good healthcare or access to childcare, the local youth clubs weren't being shut down and
Mm.
there was like civic infrastructure, people wouldn't be so angry. People would be more fulfilled and happier. We wouldn't be, I don't think we'd be seeing the divisions that we are now.
Mm.
This hasn't come just because of the last 10 to 15 years. This is like a 40-year project since Thatcher was here,
Mm.
where neoliberal market dominated views of how things should be delivered have been building where we are. So I think we need to stop thinking like, oh, just because we've had 14 years of Tory rule. No, it was also New Labour before then. It was also, yeah, everything from when Thatcher came
Mm.
in that sense.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to blame, like, if we even step back even further, right? If we try to blame a party, try to blame an individual, right? It is very challenging to necessarily chart out a path that they could have taken differently, quite honestly, right? Like, and this is not, again, an excuse, right? The reason we are where we are today is because that it kind of plays to human nature, right? That it plays to generating profit, it plays
Yeah.
to generating wealth, and it makes it so that, theoretically it's easier to do that for certain individuals. And those people, once they get money, they keep making rules that help them make money.
Yeah.
And I think uh, I don't want to blame it on one group of parties or persons, but I do want to I guess really ask ourselves, like, well, how do we fight that kind of human nature system, right? Because that's tough, right? We have motivators, right? People get the idea that they can be the next wealthy person, and then they start pulling up the ladder behind them, and you're just like, oh, it's really challenging to figure out how we propose a system that works. And so, like, maybe talk to me a little bit about like how you're thinking about it now, in the sense of like, what can you do, right? Because if you've been in this space, and I'm sensing a little bit of frustration, right, with the sector, and what could be done, right? Like, and if you don't have the answer, you don't have the answer, right? Like, talk us through it.
No, but I think it's not, it's frustration is there, but I think there's a worry of sense of, if we just keep things the way they are with some small changes here or there around the edges, we we do some tweaks a little bit there, a little bit that, and that sense of like changing things, like we won't necessarily kind of like address the fundamental issues and the structural issues that exist that will enable us to, I think, build a more fairer, equal, just society, one that we all want to live in and we want to see in that sense.
Okay.
So there's a sense of, yes, frustration. And I think frustration is also like, I guess, the inertia towards some of that radical change and deeper work that needs to happen, as opposed to just, well, the stuff we just like to do is just like fiddle around the edges, right?
Okay.
So I think there's a sense of like that work to kind of like do the fundamental changes is deep work. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be like messy, knotty stuff, but someone needs to do
Naughty
it.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, a
Okay.
sense of like, we need to do it. We need to get our hands dirty.
Yeah. Okay. And so let me just kind of dig into the around the edges dynamic, because a lot of people, when they're listening to this, I mean, it's kind of hard to conceptualize, right? So if you're saying the stuff that's around the edges, right? So you're talking about jobs, like, we both work in the impact sector, quote unquote, right? The space where we're trying to like make more ethical businesses, more impactful organizations, more social connection, right? We already do that. The issue of it being on the edges is that it doesn't change the fundamental structure, right? That it just keeps doing more of the same, right? So for instance, if I create another community group that does local activities for young people, right? I'm not actually solving the problem of how come all the young people are out having nothing to do.
Yeah.
I'm just giving them something to do, right? We're not actually getting to the root of the issue.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so when you're saying getting our hands dirty, we're talking about fundamentally a question of, what are the rules that govern how we spend our days, almost, right? Like right now, the assumption is 8 hours a day, you go work your wagey life, you come back, you eat your meal that you get from Tesco or the supermarket, and you're just like, this is my life, right? And there's a fundamental dissatisfaction, because sometimes that 8 hours is 16 hours, and it's 16 hours in an Uber or 16 hours on an Amazon warehouse floor.
Yeah.
If they'll give you that, right?
Yeah.
But
there's a thing of like, I think this is so the listeners and people watching this, that community group doing that specific piece of work, we need them to do that, because we're in a crisis where if they weren't doing that,
Yeah.
we'll have like detrimental impact,
Huge.
both for those young people, their families, their communities, massive. So I'm not saying pull the ladder away from the idea, but we need to be fully aware that we need to operate in, I guess, 2 time horizons. There's an immediate sense of like the crisis is here and now. We need to solve for it because effectively, and we as a collective, government on itself isn't able to or willing to. Is more because the sense
True.
of like is I think it's more of a willingness because as we saw during COVID, the minute that they wanted to end homelessness, they did it within a matter of a week, right? That kind of like rapid action, get everything going. They got homeless off the street because there was a pandemic, right? It required an emergency wartime like response. Like funds were found, all sorts of stuff. It was there. It's doable. We can solve. So there's a sense of a willingness.
Yeah.
There's more
Okay.
that. So I'm tired of this sense of like we need to choose between A or B. No, we could do both
Mm-hmm.
if you're willing to do it. If you're willing to take the tough actions required, right?
Sounds a little spooky. I mean, I get it, right? It sounds spooky though, right? Because some of these things around like what is willing, right? I think a lot of people would be uncomfortable with willing, and I think it's not, it's not necessarily the people who are struggling, right?
Yeah.
They would be like, all right, hey, let's do it. Clearly, there's people who are willing to take action and go into protests at hotels, protest on the streets, be angry about Palestine, what have you, right? There are people who are willing to action. It's the institutions and the structures that are at play right now that don't want to shift.
And the rule book that they play to, right? Like if we're working with a sense of government institutions from a budget perspective, they're always looking at this kind of like mandated fiscal rule that they impose upon themselves that are not looking seriously at things like a wealth tax. They're not looking at seriously saying the mountains of money that sits there within the corporate space that's just going to kind of like nothing but kind of like dividend buybacks or whatever, like in terms of the hot money that's flowing around. It needs a place to go. They're beholden to like things like the bond market, this kind of like system that no one really knows, but they practically run our governments.
So are you this prompts the question of like, let's say we tax the wealthy, right? Are you anti-globalist, right? Because theoretically, there's this big hyped up fear right now that the non-doms, so non-domiciled individuals who are tax residents tax residents here in the country, but also they move their money around globally, right? Essentially, and there's this worry that the ultra wealthy, who are these non-doms who move in, park their money assets here, and then they take off, that they'll take their money with them and leave. Are you like how do you feel about globalism, right? Because right now globalism is the reason why money can go from the corporation in Ireland and skip paying taxes in a certain jurisdiction.
Listen, globalization has both benefited us, but also has just completely like ripped apart social fabrics in many ways, and also decimated kind of global majority countries as well.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, like globalization favors the rich, the powerful, the kind of like the larger countries at the expense of
wherever I can get a cheap wage.
Yeah, and I think we also need to kind of question some of these fallacies of this kind of like people coming in and like running away in that sense of like, with their money. I mean, the whole non-dom structure is a legacy of colonialism.
Yeah.
Look at where the non-dom countries are. British Virgin Islands, Caribbean, former British colonies. We've turned what the colonial countries into basically like tax havens for the benefit of
the wealthy.
The UK.
Yeah,
at the expense of the population of people that live there, right?
Yeah. So it's not like they're wealthy either, right?
So it's one of our lovely kind of colonial legacy projects, in the sense of what we created for ourselves. And I think we need to be like, we're saying what we're going to tax, like I fundamentally believe that we need to be taxing assets that people are just sitting on, not so much what people are earning in terms of like the everyday people who are saying I'm paying way too much tax. It's because we're going on like income tax, VAT in other places, right? We're not taxing at a reasonable rate, like really rich people, families that are just sitting on multiple millions and billions of assets, right? Just there, right? And it's just rent. It's that sense of rentier income, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's value that's just comes from no
creation.
It's just grace. It's just you just have to be sitting on it, right?
Yeah.
I think part of what we created is we've also created the perfect storm where because of an economic structure where, and I get this from the notion, like maybe like what you call ordinary people who are against some of this stuff, because if you look at like the a classic story of someone who bought their house in the 1970s, right?
Mm,
They just bought it and it was, I don't know, £5,000 or whatever.
yeah.
And now it's worth £1 million. For them, they're living in a system where, that's for them, they see that as their like retirement
Yeah.
money, right? Because
Yeah.
we don't fund all this stuff properly, right? We
No, yeah.
basically said, no, you now have to like, this is your nest egg.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you've done is ended up, if we take housing, for example, financialized housing and the housing market. The value of the housing market is, I don't know what it is, how many multiples it is of the size of the UK economy.
GDP.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I should have like got my number checked, but it's multiples.
yeah.
That's bonkers. That's for us is like, how have we ended up in this position? So if you just take that for example, so in the impact space, if you and if it's noble, we do build more affordable housing, get more stuff going, and there's a lot of money going to that space,
Yeah.
into impact funds, that. So we're not addressing the fundamental issue here, which is the way we look at housing, the way we look at value, the way we look at like the relationship of housing to land prices and the
Yeah.
disconnect. These models that we're creating aren't addressing that, and that might be fine because that's not their job to do that. But fundamentally, until you restructure something like housing completely,
I
you can
totally agree.
launch as many impact funds within housing as you want. And also, let's be honest with you, some of the definitions of affordable housing with some of these funds, which is 70 or 80% of market value, that's not affordable.
Yeah.
Like
The market value is way out of like
at the
scope.
expense of, I think, models that I think are really valuable, like community land trusts, which I've
Mm.
done work in, which are very kind of more grassroots oriented
Yeah,
housing
very good stuff.
structures. They're struggling to get any sense of money from like government because you need to subsidize it. It needs grant funding, it needs patient capital, it needs flex, which is why they're like always small scale projects, right? The number
Yeah.
of like CLTs we have in the UK is
Fraction.
tiny, and it's I love the CLT model, I love the CLT sector, and I think they do great work. But you can see that they're like striving to try and get the attention of whether it's like policymakers, others, to like for it to be taken seriously or to be given a system that works for them, where they get access to opportunities like land or access to opportunity like finance or resources, right?
I'm going to point out two examples I think that could really help people understand like some of the rules that could change that are fundamentally not being changed, right? So for instance, Scotland reformed their real estate purchasing laws, right? And it is a 30-day close in terms of you get put in your offer for your home, and 30 days later you own your home.
Yeah.
Boom, it's great. It's a great closing process. I'm sure I've oversimplified it, right? Here in England, right, we see people going for 12 months, 6 months, nightmares, and it's just absolutely horrendous experience for people that literally destroys value, only funds a group of people, and no one's willing to change the laws on this, right? And you're like, you know what? If we were going to fix one problem, let's talk about the problem that gives people nightmares every single day. It's the home buying process here in the UK, in England, right? Absolute nightmare. And then there's the other thing that you said. Now my brain has just slipped it. What were you saying there? So I think when it comes to the community land trust, you mentioned patient capital. And I think this is an interesting dichotomy that people have to balance these days. So you think about the people who have enough money to finance any kind of project, like something that's more patient capital, more socially oriented, right? If they're just a good person who cares about their communities, like, you know what, I want to give them some money. They're faced with two considerations, or at least two considerations, right? I could YOLO all my money into Bitcoin, right, and hope that I'm going to get even more money, and then maybe I'll lend some of that money.
Yeah.
Or they're told by some, well-meaning individual, I'm going to build some housing here for the community. It's going to be a community asset. If you give us money, we'll give you back 2%, 3%. And you're like, 2%, 3%? Who wants 2%, 3%? Right? Like, it's hard to argue, right? You've discovered this whole world where you could yeet your money and get 10x. And then someone comes to you like, hey, man, I want to make a difference in the community. If you have no social connection to the community, there's like zero chance you're going to do this, right? Like, look, how little social relationships we have these days. Like, who's going to convince you to do that 2 to 3%? That's wild.
Also, there's a sense of, I agree with the thrust of what you just said there. There's also some bit of like, at what point are you okay with people just saying, actually, this is enough for me? And I think we're
Mm,
living in a society where I think, not everyone, but I think there is this sense of like, I call it the kind of like the hustle economic,
yeah.
right? The sense of always wanting more, the sense of more is good, that sense of greed that goes with it. And
Yep.
I think we're seeing two strands. I think we're seeing people pushing back against that in some sense of saying, actually, we need to live within our means, whether it's planetary boundaries or economic boundaries, but also the sense of like, actually, what does enough look like? And, the sense of obscene amount of wealth not being valued in the way it was or kind of position. But on the other side, we're still seeing the number of like billionaires, millions grow up every year. We're still seeing a sense of like,
Yeah.
pushing kind of the lifestyle of like, this is kind of me and this is how I live and this is kind of like the clothes I buy, the car, the sense of we haven't gone away from it in that sense. So I feel there's a sense that it's still there. I also worry about how much of this kind of hustle mentality is fed into younger children, especially like teenage and like teenage boys and younger boys, especially who are at the mercy of the TikToks, the kind of like social media platforms where they are being effectively like targeted,
Yeah.
right? And I know why, and I can see why. When you're a kid who's grown up poor in Tower Hamlets, Newham, or whatever, you look at that and you're like, you want to get out of the reality that you're in because growing up poor is not, it's not a nice experience. It's scarring.
Yeah.
I still remember things I had to go through, or like even at the age I'm at now, I'm like a middle class person by all means. I haven't forgotten about that.
Mm,
And when you're a young person whose opportunities have been decimated across the board, and like there's a sense of a hopelessness, you cling on to that because it's a powerful narrative in the sense of like, no, it's not your fault. It's like you just need to hustle more. You need to do that. You need to blame, basically like do all these various things, and then seeing, these like rag to riches stories of like people just made like 10K on Bitcoin or various things like that.
yeah.
It's all happening on like social media platforms. It's like it's already there. It's already baked in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you speak to young people, they're like firmly into that space.
I mean,
And
I can't blame them, right? Like, hey, we put out content onto social media, and then, you look and like, hey, I love me. I'm happy with me, right? But like, the reality is like, you're gonna compare. Let's just put my video next to some other dude
yeah,
who's maybe like super jacked, driving a Lamborghini,
yeah,
rolling up at a fancy hotel, like boom, 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 amazing funk music going on
yeah.
next to it, and you're like, I think I'll be that guy, right? Like, you're not like, oh, hey, look, I'm gonna be Andrew. He's sitting on his couch
No, I
talking
just,
to a
but
beer. No offense, love
no,
you,
no,
right?
I think, I remember growing up when I was like, I remember the first time me and friends with like, something like Canary Wharf, like we left our like state, we like, we're in Canary Wharf, we're like, what the hell is this place?
Yeah,
And like, it wasn't a long journey, but like the sudden transition was insane. We've just gone from our estate and we're in Canary Wharf and we're surrounded by all this.
yeah,
And I think this is where, there's a sense that I don't see that understanding of like what's going on around, let's just say like the impact when we try and tackle these deep rooted structural senses of inequality. It's not, you're not going to do that by just growing more social enterprise. And we need that stuff in it, but that's not going to like resolve
the
that stuff
fundamentals.
there because that's to do with housing areas having been decimated for every single thing. The only thing left is like a chicken shop, a vape shop, a betting shop. There's no
Woo!
but there's no civic institutions where the youth clubs have gone.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
The schools are struggling. The schools are even shutting down as well because
That's the crazy part, right?
it's a sense of like there's gangs and rampant crime because that's now seen as a route out to kind of like
Mm,
kind of like get a quick win and go like, or get some kind of like monetary value by doing certain things. There's a sense of a jobs market that is absolutely now extremely difficult for young people and will probably get harder because of potentially
AI.
some of the stuff around
Yeah,
AI, where they're saying actually, the ways in to get like junior or entry level jobs, even if they had a chance, because those jobs would have been hard anyway.
yeah, they would.
If you're coming from like housing state, not going to a top university,
Yeah,
right?
and you're trying to go like a
Or
financial
what?
services
Yeah,
to get a
yeah,
paycheck that works.
exactly.
Right?
I mean, just look at our creative sector, for example. That's something that's not even financial services. That's dominated by kind of like middle class people from like top tier universities
Yeah, yeah.
because they can afford to live in London to do a 6-month internship for free.
Or right? It's just to take 6 months to focus on your craft, right? Like, don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, that's incredible, but also 6 months, right?
Really?
That's rent,
Mm.
right? That's food. Like, where
Yeah.
am I going to afford these kind of things, right? Just to focus on my art, like,
Yeah.
that's a struggle, right?
So like, and it's a mixture of those things. It's also make sure that, our education, our approach to education has not changed since the Victorian times. We're still fundamentally using the same structures
Yeah,
of teaching kids. University now is a complete dead end for a lot of kids. Like, why would
yeah.
they go be saddled with 50,000 minimum of like debt to come out of it, no guarantee of a job?
Or to get a job that's 25K
Yeah,
a year.
exactly. And like, you see that across the board of like, whether there's people who are like graduates who are underemployed, who've been like struggling to find a job for a year. Someone alerted me to a piece on, like, I think it was the Times, which I don't really read the Times, but it was about the profile of 5 Oxbridge graduates who
Yeah.
can't even get a job right now.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing that, yeah.
And some of it was a bit like, God, this, like, actually, like, the way they framed it was a bit like, this is terrible. Because one person was like, yeah, I was looking for a job, but then I went to Australia for 6 months because my friend was just like, okay, this is getting a bit silly now. But essentially, if the cream of the crop, if our elites can't get a job,
Yeah.
in that sense, how's it going to be for a young kid growing up poor in Newham or Stockport or wherever, in that sense, right?
Yeah.
So we need to fundamentally like restructure all these, because we just run the risk of just using the same system, churning more out. And
Yeah.
I think having a lost generation is what I'm worried about, because the numbers for
very
youth
fast.
unemployment are staggering right now.
Yeah.
I think they reached 1 million recently or something
Good
like that,
God.
who are like NEETs.
Yeah. Okay. Just for
Where do those
context,
kids go?
66 million people in the UK, 1 million, right? That's a big number.
Yeah, and that's
right?
like, but you're looking at lost generation
Yeah.
approaches, right? And we know what happens from a politics perspective. We've seen it in, I think, America and other places, where who captures that group in terms of the narrative for saying, "Oh, yeah, well, it's not your fault it's happened." And using it as a
Blame an
purchase.
audience. Yeah.
Yeah, blame an audience, blame a group. The rhetoric of like, "Oh, it's because like people are coming and take your jobs, or they're taking access."
It's a full on
So-
powder keg situation.
No, but I think we should be worried, and maybe some people say I'm being alarmist, but the sense is like history has shown.
I think being an alarmist is an okay thing, right?
I'm
Because
fine being alarmist.
yeah, I've accepted my role.
Yeah.
Good, because I think what comes of it, right, is that one, there's this one requirement for someone to at least highlight an end point, or at least a part of the spectrum that is dangerous, right? And then at least if some people hear that, they can say, hey, look, I should be cognizant of the fact that, my family's young people, or at least the friends that right? Because you've got to have kids, or excuse me, you've got neighbors or friends who have kids that are in this age group who don't have pathways. And everybody needs to be aware of that, because ultimately, it literally is our future, right? Like, that is the future state that we leave to our children if we haven't had them yet, or if we do have them, right? Because they have to deal with the next generation of power managers, right, of the system. So I do think that that's a necessary thing in our society, even if you're completely wrong, which it would be good if you were wrong almost in some ways, right?
The data right now is alarming. The data is alarming across all fronts. And we're in a period of, I think, prolonged economic decline, right? So the thing that we're betting on to make this all work from a policy perspective, based on what I've seen so far, all the kind of stuff that's come out from Labour in the last year or so, is the big bet on the house is economic growth. Because if you get economic growth happening, we'll see more of the kind of like funds that are going to be available from tax receipts and other areas. There'll be more prosperity, more jobs, etc., etc., etc. If you look at the forecasts of growth, just from a range of economists and sources, the idea that we're going to get economic growth anytime soon is extremely misguided. But let's wait to see, because effectively there's going to come a point in time where this country has to kind of like make some tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
Now, from what it's looking like, we'll see, I guess, what the autumn budget will be like. But Labour have already ruled out any sense of a wealth tax in the radical position. I think they're looking at things like capital gains tax and other
property tax reform.
We should have property tax reform, because it's ridiculous that council tax
Yeah.
has not been reassessed in God knows how long. It's just bonkers. But it's good that they're like now picking up the mantle to do that, and I think it's much needed. I think there's a fundamental problem with like, the UK economy per se, is a sense that we still have a very unbalanced economy.
Yeah.
London is London. The rest of the country is on a
Left
different
behind.
stratosphere, left behind. We're betting on like big kind of like movers coming in certain industries and areas, like the obsession around AI, life science, all these areas, which I think could be like positives for growth. But
Yeah, of
I
course, of
think we
course.
need to be like, we need to understand when you talk about building AI data center, yeah, you're not going to employ hundreds and hundreds of people.
It's like five folks running
Yeah,
around.
the idea, like it's tech, so you'll just need a few people, right? And the
Yeah.
sense of like the economic benefit that'll bring in terms of what that means in terms of jobs and all that various stuff
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
I think it's extremely limited. Like we don't really have a sense of like what this kind of growth looks like outside of these big projects, and I think
And
that's my worry is
And
that
this is a big gap from government because, like, and actually, I'm thinking about a book I have over here on the wall somewhere. AI superpowers, right? This is a book written like 5 years ago, which is about this notion of that China and the U.S. are going to compete on AI technology. So let's just play that world out and say that AI doesn't really become like a job massive creating industry here in the UK. Um, the government is not painting a future for how AI actually works for people who are non-AI jobs, right? Like no one's talking
yeah,
about what does, all the people end up doing who get replaced. There's not even a question, right? Like it's just assumed, and this is that techno determinism that we will find new jobs. And you're like, okay, cool. Let's play with that, right? There is a risk here that people are not being prepared for this new construct, right? And what the book proposed in AI Superpowers is that there's this future where people are actually being paid to care for other people, right? Actually build community connections,
yeah.
which, that's coming from a random book. Why can't government propose a solution as to what, our future could look like when it comes to an AI thing? And I think this goes to your point that there's just this fundamental assumption that we could just keep doing what we're doing and that growth will come and that we will find enough money and that it'll work, right? And they're just taking a massive punt.
This is, and I think this is the problem, is that it's a complete like, well, using the American NFL term, it's a complete Hail Mary pass. Like you're hoping for the best because the the beauties of living in a globalized world means that there are so many factors and variables that come in that could derail that in
Oh
that
yeah,
sense, right?
real quick.
Because economic growth doesn't just come out of nothing. There's a sense of like, well, from a trade perspective, you need a trading partner. There's all sorts of different things. There's always you've seen the whole like, um, what's been coming through with the kind of Donald Trump tariffs and just the complete like no one knows where he's going with that. It's completely like loose cannon. Like,
Yeah.
just says of it.
There's policies in Vietnam that have not even been finalized despite a trade deal being completed between the US and Vietnam.
Yeah.
And these guys are like, well, hey, cool, we have a trade deal. But
But
what
also,
are
like,
the rules?
no, but also fundamentally, it's less like, we need to look at the fact that when you look at something like the FTSE 100, 80% of the companies on that, like the kind of index, derive majority of their revenues overseas. There's a
That's
sense of
wild.
like, there's a
These
sense
are
of
British
like,
companies, right?
yeah, but like, there's a sense of like, how much of that money is like
Here.
staying here within here, and also kind of like, I don't know, but trickling down to like these communities in the sense of that, because that's where I struggle to understand
I use
the
this analogy.
narrative versus the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I used this analogy the other day when when I was talking to them about like what happens in left behind places, right? Even if we have large British companies that are making money, does that mean the money is being invested where they are? So think about a corporate HQ
Mm.
being based in a place. At least you're creating jobs in a location. But let's take a Greg's, right, which has got its headquarters in Newcastle, and then it opens up a stand in the community. Most of the money ends up going back to Newcastle,
Yeah.
right? Which means, sure, yeah, there's 4 people, 6 people that are employed at the Greg's, but most of the profits go to Newcastle, and then from Newcastle to London, and then from London to the Bahamas, right?
Yeah.
And it's gone,
Yeah.
right? So what is the creation process of value there, right? Because the only value that was created was the sausage roll exchange, God bless,
Yeah.
and the 5, 6 employees.
Yeah, and maybe the supply chain
Sure.
around it,
But even locally, right?
Yeah, but I think I think this is where the value of like social business, social enterprise are, and like these kind of structures, because they
Yeah.
do root themselves in the community, and also whatever value is derived is almost within that confines of
Mhm,
that area. The real struggle is like there's still a tiny like fraction in terms of the overall economic pie.
True.
The struggle is also from a policy perspective. I don't think they're taken seriously by the likes of people like the Treasury and others.
No.
And that's no offense to the great work being done by all sorts of partners in the space. But let's be honest here, like
Most social enterprises haven't figured out how to make lots of money, and that's what Treasury cares about.
That's what they care. They care about tax receipts,
Yeah.
jobs, all that stuff, right? And I think that this is why they've always been seen as a bit of a
Very fluffy.
Yeah, just they're not kind of a core part of our industrial strategy. They're not kind of like rooted within our economic kind of like.
I think inherently social business or social enterprise and these organizations which care about connecting with local people requires an individual bit of attention that is really challenging to scale, which is where it comes into the challenge of saying, oh, I'm going to make shed loads of cash, right? Because to make lots of money, you need lots of cogs, and people are not cogs in social enterprises, right? They're just people, right?
Yeah.
And that's the mismatch between how we make lots of money and how we create lots of connection.
Yeah, but I think we need to be okay with
we need to be okay with
it. Verticalization, we need to scale everything to be big in the sense of, but this problem is our economic models of like what is good economically is completely outdated too. How we derive this GDP number and then every quarter I'm told the economy is growing by 0.4%. What the hell does that mean?
Bigger is better.
No, but what does that even mean? Like, what
does it mean?
Genuinely, like, and then someone's like, no, but like, actually, it's actually better because like the revised forecasts showed it's 0.6%. And then I'm like, but genuinely, what is all this? Because there's this invisible market and structures we've created that no one understands. You go to university, I study economics, you get shown all these formulas, all these structures, all these numbers, but it's like,
how well did you do?
No, but it's like mathematical. It's like, a lot of it is just like conceptual.
Yeah, it's these big systems that no one ever tangibly gets to interact.
But it's just like, then these numbers are pumped out and it's just like, but what does it mean here? Like, what is 0.4% in the context of what is good and bad, right? Like, whenever it's like a slightly positive number, like they're all rushing out for the press conference, like, yeah, we're really doing great. Our numbers are this, that, we're the second highest in the G8, blah, 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 all this stuff. This is just pseudo bullshit speak that it's just for a particular audience, which is the financial world and those kind of like those markets who've like built this fallacy of this is what good is. It's not. Do you think the people who are living in like and the poor parts of UK really care about this?
Yeah. No.
Although the economy is growing 0.4%. No, they're looking at it saying it's like my pay packet's less, everything's way more expensive. My rent's gone up by like this much,
and the interest rate has to.
Interest rates is like stubbornly still high. Local services, everything will be decimated. Council tax is going up. Rubbish is everywhere. That's what they see.
Winning.
So I think there's this detachment from like this kind of bubble that we're in, and then the real world.
There's a bubble.
There's always a bubble, and there is a bubble within AI at the moment. So the amount of like hot money that's like basically like this is like money, like investment money always needs to go somewhere where there's a yield, there's a yield, and we've plucked a lot of the low-hanging fruit. So then what happens is you go for more racier stuff because you need returns, right? And the amount of money that's going into AI R&D right now is insane. Like if you look at how much corporates are putting in, and what tangible returns we can get from that in the sense of that. But we're talking about billions and trillions are just going in.
MIT just put out a report that said 96% of generative AI companies are failing. 96%.
Yeah, the money keeps flowing in, right? It's the same. We saw this with the kind of like flurry of the kind of like companies now that we hold up as being like really big and large, like the Deliveroo's, the Ubers, the Metas, where and I don't know how many of them are actually even making a profit to this day, but effectively so much VC money went into that space, so much backed them through decades of a lost position.
Yeah.
That enabled them to basically go and undercut, like for example, Uber undercut local minicab companies saying we can operate at a loss and we can sustain ourselves.
And we can burn your whole industry.
No, we can, and that's what they did. That's what they did.
Yeah.
Right? that was their game plan. And then effectively, like with AI, we're just seeing another gold rush or tulip mania where they're just basically like everyone's scrambling to get in because it's been seen as the next big thing at the expense of some of the stuff they could be putting that money into use across the board, which will might give them a smaller return over a longer period of time, but will generate deeper lasting impact, societal change. And
So
we
we've
have a
identified
government that's almost saying we're okaying this because we need their money to come in. We want to
we need the Hail Marys.
we want to have a chat with Palantir because we want them to build their data center here.
Yeah.
We won't talk about what Palantir has been doing supporting Israel's kind of war effort in terms of where their technology is going. But hey, let's bring them in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I've got some takeaways from this, right? The first one is being that there's this question around the structural nature of what it is that we're assuming as being okay and what is good, right? And then the second one, there was this interesting part where we talked about the storytelling behind the narrative that is coalescing action. I don't want to say on the left, right? But coalescing action and providing an alternative to the extreme right, right? And then the third is this notion that there is a fundamental repositioning of our values that we need to be looking at here and saying, what is enough, right? Because if we keep going down this route of pursuing nonstop this financial growth number of point or not 0.6 or whatever, and we're just, that's all we pursue, we are fundamentally destroying so many aspects of our way of life that we end up prioritizing VC style returns, which arguably is one of the most toxic kind of financial instruments that's been invented. That being said, be clear, I have participated in this world too, right? So we're not innocent, right? But like that is the struggle that we face. Any other thoughts or closing things as we kind of wrap our mind around like the frustrations that are out there? Actually, no, before we close, what I want to challenge you and ask you is, despite all the frustrating things that are there, what things do you take? How do you keep yourself going? And what small things do you do to try to navigate these frustrations that you've mentioned?
Look, I fundamentally think that we could course correct and like really change things. And I think there's now a growing community of people who want to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
And also I think community is really important. So the sense that it's not just you feeling like it's just you thinking these things, it's actually building these connections with people that also might sit outside of your kind of like normal networks or realms, right? Like, so I think that's what I'm beginning to see more, and I'm beginning to see it all coalesce in this narrative of, listen, the system as it stands cannot continue the way it is, and there's a deep frustration, but also a willingness for people to want to bring that change, both at a societal level, but also within themselves in terms of how they operate and engage with the world or with each other. So I think there are moments where we can start to do that. I think there's a real value of like building it, and also it's like, we've spoken a lot about where the impact economy is not doing great and our frustration, but there's also there's a lot of like really great things happening. So like really people are pushing progressive. So I think there's almost harnessing that and almost building this kind of coalition to kind of like come together a bit more, organize, change things, but also understand that it's not going to happen overnight. We need to kind of be here for the long run. So I think there's all these things. And I think there's also just kind of like for a personal level, there's, like it's something I deeply care about, as much as like I don't live in the same community I grew up in. I still want to think about the next generation of people like me or kids like me who are probably in a worse position than I was when they were growing up, and thinking about what does that route and pathway look like for them. So I think within that we have that, and I think within the UK we've got the context of, we have a good fabric, we've got a good social fabric. There's lots of things here that are still in place. It's quite hard. I mean, look at other countries, it's like there's nothing there, but actually, like, there's a good kind of like structure in place for us to kind of benefit from in that sense. So I think, how do you harness that? But also, how do we build a vision that reaches across the divide? So we're not just doing it from the position of like, we talk about the people who are like susceptible to the messages that are coming out, plus reform and other areas. The worst thing we could do is go to them and be like, you're this, you're scumbags, you're terrible. We need to actually reach across the divide and have those conversations, challenge them where it's right to challenge them and call them out on things. But also like some of the stuff that they're angry about is stuff that we're talking about as well. It's being forgotten about, communities being left behind. unfairness in our structure, an economic system that doesn't work, something in which they don't feel like they can support and care for their families or their loved ones. That's a shared endeavor there.
Yeah.
So let's build commonality with them and show actually we're kind of wanting the same things. Yeah, at the same time, that's so it's
Propose
important.
a
But
solution
like
to
if there's stuff like also calling them out and just challenging on things that fundamentally are racist, bigoted, and kind of come from a place of hate.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because, I know there are people who vote quite conservatively, and I don't fault them for that necessarily. I do take issue obviously with hate and how that's propagated, because I think when we accept hate as the narrative, we focus on the emotion. We
Mm,
forget rational
yeah,
and logical thought. And I think there's obviously a place for emotion, but hate is not one that should be advanced. And I find it really challenging, um, sometimes, to have these conversations with people who share really like really different political views,
yeah.
and trying to build a friendship has to be more than political views, right? And I think this is the thing that we really struggle with today, is that when you meet someone who's on the other end of the political spectrum, you're just like, not done, bye, right? Like, it's like Tinder. You literally just freaking swipe left
Yeah,
and
like
walk away.
just look, I mean, I would say, from my experience, like look at most people's social and friendship groups in London, in particular, like you kind of hang around the same people who kind of are like very much the same mold as you.
Yeah,
And I get that. I'm not saying that, and I understand why that is. I just think that we need to find a way to have this dialogue. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're just going to have siloed groups.
yeah,
And what's going to happen is for the group on the other side, who are like almost like we see as being problematic and
yeah.
have, and I agree, also have views that I'm
Don't
very against,
resonate
and
with. Yeah,
I'm not here to legitimize their views at all whatsoever. But they're at the mercy of the kind of like the right wing campaign,
yeah,
right? The messaging, and they've already been captured.
yeah.
Look at what you watch, some of like GB News or Talk TV. It's like 24/7 rolling coverage of migrant hotels right now. Literally that. They found it's like Brexit. They found their node. They're going for it.
No, hitting it.
They're going for it here. And one thing in political messaging, it's not necessarily your messaging that's important, but it's like the consistency of just going for the same thing.
Yeah,
Boom, boom, boom.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's alarming.
And then you see a debate where they brought in someone from like a left position. So you just see like the complete like loggerheads they're at, in the sense of what it looks like. So we need to find a way where we try and like build a narrative that there are elements of what we care for in terms of changing things and what we're frustrated by, that
Yeah,
they also share the same thing. Like, and I think the economic
there's
side,
so much.
but the economic side is the biggest one for me.
Yeah, yeah. That's
The stuff around economic injustice, unfairness in our system, people feeling like they're being left behind or shut out from the system.
yeah.
All things that's a UK wide thing. That's almost a
I think it's a
class
global
thing.
thing.
It's a global thing, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
because I see this the same way happening in the States, right? I think it's a little bit better in some areas, but there is no doubt that I have felt like, once I was at a party and I met some folks who had come from New York, and I was living in Texas at the time.
yeah,
There was just this disdain from them towards me, and I was like, that's kind of weird, man, because like I'm not some kind of like hate spewing hillbilly or something
yeah,
like that, right?
yeah,
I'm just a dude who lives here in Dallas, Texas,
yeah,
and you're just kind of crapping on me
yeah,
for not living in New York. And then can you imagine what it would be like for a person who is actually a hillbilly? And God bless them, right? They're cool people, right? I know country folk, right?
yeah.
And they come in and they get shat on effectively. You're like, yeah, it's really not a great feeling, is it? So building these bridges is something that we need to continue
But
to
we
do for
don't
the
have
social
the
infrastructure.
infrastructure. Yeah, the commons, the spaces, right?
Mm,
Where are those spaces where you have that ability to kind of bring together networks like that? I mean, it used to be that you had like community centers. I guess pubs were also something like these kind of like it's these infrastructure bits of like, where does that even happen?
mm,
Like most of the stuff for the spaces in London right now, for example, like spaces that are like bars, right? Like you have to go and buy something, you have to go purchase something. They're prohibitive. They're not something that anyone could just come in and walk into, right?
mm.
You mentioned the festival you're going to, which
Yeah.
sounds great, but that's like a £200 ticket to go in, and it's meant to
Yeah.
be like a festival that's there to promote dialogue and
Yeah.
conversation
But only
and
one
free
type of
thinking.
dialogue.
Yeah, from a certain type of person,
Yeah.
from a certain type of class background and income bracket, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Same with universities. Universities were very old days, places of bringing together people to kind of have debate, discussion, dialogue, a space where people could come in from different class backgrounds and access opportunities on an equal basis.
Yeah.
Now look at it. They're like the sense of like we've lost these structures of spaces that enable this work to happen. Where are the commons that can? I mean, all the commons have been privatized,
Yeah.
and now they're kind of like dictated by market norms. Where are these spaces?
Challenging. Very challenging.
Right? And then you've got the sense of I guess things that's happening in like the housing market where communities are also being driven out because they can't afford to live in areas, and it's like
Yeah, you can't even host the community in your own home.
so until I think there's a fundamental thing we need to kind of solve for that enables this to happen, which I'm not sure what that is yet.
Well, the positive note that I would think we can conclude on, and because there is hope and there is positive things, is I think that one, you spend the time thinking about this, but two, you're a very action-oriented person, right? From the 5 years of me watching you and then actually getting to know you in person and then actually becoming a what I would hope is friend. It has been, yeah, questionable, is around the notion that you take action and that you're doing stuff and that you're working on building solutions for this. It's not just, the commiserations and frustrations, which we definitely experience and I think is felt across the sector. But I think, I see you take action. I see you organizing. I see you working with people and bringing people together for these kind of things. And, I'm going to keep trying to do the same thing and take action from that, right? It's just to have even small groups, right? 2-3 people is something, right?
Yeah.
And
we're not gonna, it's not gonna be overnight, but like start small, start where you can, start in your community, start with what's around you. But yeah, I think that's the way that's the only thing that keeps me sane, is because otherwise I think I'd be a bit like overwhelmed and just feeling a bit of despair.
Yeah.
Because there's just so many seismic things happening that are just inherently like bad right now.
Yeah.
But what keeps me going is that kind of like localized like community based, like your community is your community, but starting small, I think is the best way forward.
Am I your community? No. Very good.
I'm very British in the sense that this country has like made me like really like avoidant of like any of these conversations.
Avoidant of any of these kind of commitments to be part of my social circle.
Right.
Very good. Well, thanks, bud. I appreciate you taking the time and,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
No. How dare you? Good. Done.
Okay, you can press stop.
No, we can let it go.
Okay.